Section 26 of Hearth and Home, Collected Poems and Stories by Various. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. John Kurtz by Pearl Clifford. Madam, I know written words are cold and vain, they cannot comfort. Even this brief expression of my deep sympathy may seem an intrusion, yet I trust the assurance that your great grief finds its way to my heart and bids me write will be sufficient apology. May the All-Father bless and keep you, and in his mercy enable you with eyes of faith to pierce the clouds of sorrow, finding the light of that peace which the world cannot give. With deep respect and sympathy, John Kurtz. Respect and sympathy. Yes, John Kurtz, I know, now 'tis too late, that your great manly heart contained both, and would have given me the fruits of them, asking nothing in return but the friendship which I so blindly withheld. I have learned at last, through long and painful teaching, how rare such generous natures are in this selfish world, which cries give, give insatiably, until one has not left save a bankrupt life. 2 years have dragged themselves over my heart's calendar since that letter was written. Today only have I broken its seal, but what shall pierce the clouds of sorrow now? A Stygian gloom has gathered round my life and settled down upon my weary heart, shutting out every ray of light. My eyes are so dim with weeping that they cannot bear to look even at the sunny memories of my girlhood, whose perfect happiness seems never to have been truly mine, so alien is it to my present misery. Oh, I cannot endure the intolerable crushing weight of a remorseful past, a wretched present, and a hopeless future. Why has my husband kept this letter from me, and estranged me from the only friend I have left in the world? Alice Dupree buried her face in her hands and wept bitterly, not tears of sorrow such as had welled up from her grief-stricken heart in a healing fountain when 2 years ago she was left fatherless. Not stormy tears of passion, nor yet those tears of surcharged emotion which are wont to fall gently and refreshingly like summer showers from passing clouds. No, these were soul tears, wrung in anguish from the very depths of an outraged woman's inmost life. For 2 years she had nursed within her heart the elements which today burst forth in a fierce storm, beneath whose pitiless terrors poor humanity fell prostrate and helpless. Surely a weary, despairing heart, thrown back upon itself with no sustaining faith, no cheering hope, suffers an exquisite soul torture that seems to fathom the agony of a living death. Yet this terrible struggle was borne alone, and by a woman. I might have said a girl, but no. These latter tears had fallen on the grave of girlhood. John Kurtz and Madame Dupree, née Alice Barthol, both claimed as a birthplace the same pretty little seaport town. Alice was only a child. Her mother had died in giving her birth, leaving her to the tender care of a father who made of his daughter an idol at whose feet no sacrifice was too great to be laid. An Englishman by birth, Mr. Barthol had come to America to secure a freedom of life which he had not found in the circumscribed circles of his native land. With ample means at the disposal of a taste refined by education and travel, he was able to surround himself with all the comforts and elegancies of life, and soon after settling in his new home, the one thing thus far lacking in his fortunate career was vouchsafed to him in the perfect contentment of a happy marriage. His wife was an orphan of obscure parentage, but a true woman, whose noble qualities and modest virtues he had discovered beneath the guise of a humble teacher. A year of such happiness as rarely falls to the lot of man was theirs, and in looking forward to the birth of their firstborn, they awaited the crowning joy of their united lives. The darling came, but just as the fond mother seemed to have, quote, found the key of life, it opened for her the gates of death, end quote. An old nurse and her father were really the only companions Alice ever knew. The latter was also her teacher, and all the resources of his well-stored mind were devoted to her education. He placed within her reach that rich fruitage of knowledge which he had garnered in long years of patient research. His strong arm bent down the topmost branches of the tree of learning, that she might herself gather from them the fairest flowers, and thus fostered, her mind developed rapidly, and claimed as the dowry of its youth many acquirements rarely attained even in mature years. Yet its graceful symmetry lacked a certain strength and self-reliance that result only from unaided effort, and the growth of her intellect seemed quite independent of her life. She was a perfect child in feeling and experience. What wonder that her father found in her inexhaustible delight, and deemed the years of womanhood, creeping apace, were still far distant. When Alice was about 15 years old, Mr. Barthol had taken into his house the young man John Kurtz, in whose advancement he felt a benevolent interest. At first he acted as his secretary, but he proved so worthy of the confidence reposed in him that this connection soon included the entire charge of his patron's business affairs. Kurtz was a self-made man. He had studied life more than books, and profited by its varied and accurate instruction. His learning was not the useless hoard of memory, but an armory of weapons, tempered by experience and always ready for practical use. From the stern tuition of adversity, he had gained principles, consistent purposes, and courageous patience. He was a man to trust, to honor. Being a fine German scholar, it had been arranged, soon after his introduction into the Barthol family, that he should give lessons in this language to Alice, and ere long he came to look forward to the hours devoted to the study with unusual interest. He saw in the young girl the promise of a noble woman, and in their intercourse sought to instill into her mind all the best teachings which he had himself gathered from life and literature. Alas, that into each Eden must creep the serpent. The war fell upon our country, and the father of Alice was devoted to the northern cause, giving generously from his abundant substance, while she contributed her mite in such things as only woman's hands can make. It chanced on one occasion that a party of prisoners were detained in town by the delay of a train, and among them was an officer, whom sickness and exposure had reduced to a very weak and critical state. Mr. Barthol proposed to the lieutenant in command that the invalid should be left in his care. The prisoner gave his parole and was removed to the house of his benefactor, where, through weary weeks of illness and convalescence, nothing was spared to promote his comfort. Colonel Dupree was a man of fine presence and elegant hearing, and although a Frenchman, spoke the English language with a scarcely perceptible accent. He soon ingratiated himself into the hearts of the Barthols, and became a welcome guest in the household. He stated that he had joined the Confederate Army from pure love of adventure, the war having broken out during his travels through the South. He had served as staff officer under General Blank, for which position his early education had fitted him, but had resolved to return to France as soon as exchanged. Commending this resolution, his host obtained the desired exchange, and having become much interested in the young foreigner, invited him to join them in a summer tour before sailing for Europe. It is needless to trace the sad story step by step. The fascinations of the man of the world, heightened by the romantic influence of the scenes through which they journeyed together, were not without effect upon the heart of the young girl just budding into womanhood. A mother might have divined the latent romance that lurks in maidens' breasts, all the more wayward and daring because of their utter inexperience of true sentiment. But how could a father suspect it? John Kurtz alone saw the danger, and the painful discovery taught him also that he too had learned to love. How many weary hours of thought were his! Under any circumstances, honor would have compelled him to conceal his feelings, but now the task was doubly hard. He had long since suspected Colonel Dupree to be a bold adventurer. Could he let him go on without an effort to circumvent his wiles? And then came the doubt whether his mistrust was not prompted by jealousy. At last he resolved to tell Mr. Barthol his opinion of the foreigner, relying upon his honesty of purpose to justify the seemingly unwarrantable step. He did so, but the unsuspecting man of honor was hard to convince, even when his attention was called to many significant trifles before unnoticed. However, his resolve was taken, and with his accustomed frankness he told his daughter of his half-formed suspicions, and informed her of his decision to return home at once, which would suggest to the colonel the propriety of leaving them. Alice was so overcome by this denouement that she assented to all in a sort of stupefaction. Then came the first struggle in her young life. She thought, alas, the too often fatal mistake, she thought she loved, that life without this man would be to her a blank. Little did she know of the great world that lay beyond her sheltered home, and her childish ignorance of evil and of sorrow had been unconsciously fostered by the parental love that fondly fancied itself her impenetrable panoply. But no outward armor can guard against the illusions and deceits of life. That evening Alice, in a moment of impulsive confidence, told the colonel of her father's decision. He instantly saw and seized his advantage. The present was his only chance of winning the lovely heiress, and with the persuasive words of his wily tongue he wooed his innocent victim to fly with him. He played that bold game of now or not at all, most adroitly and with success. The hastily written note to a loving father, the gathering together of trinkets and clothing, a servant bribed, a secret marriage, and the curtain falls upon the final, irretrievable act of the feverish drama. The next morning Mr. Barthel received the following note, which disclosed the terrible truth. "My own darling papa, I know I am doing wrong, but you will forgive me. I cannot give up Colonel Dupree. We shall be married tonight and sail for Europe tomorrow, but he promises to bring me back soon. Then you will forgive us, and we shall all be happy again together. Goodbye, dearest papa. Your own loving Alice." Happy again together! Poor deluded child, never would that bright vision be realized. When John Kurtz had waited beyond the usual hour for breakfast, and none of the party appeared, he went to Mr. Barthel's room, and receiving no response to his knock, listened and heard a low groan. Effecting an immediate entrance, he found his old friend lying on the floor, totally unconscious, and grasping a letter in his hand. He released it, read its contents, and knew all. For a moment he paused, as though it were more than he could bear. Then, raising the almost lifeless body to the bed, he summoned medical aid. But it was of little avail. The sudden shock had hastened the culmination of one of those invidious diseases which hang like an invisible sword of Damocles over many lives. Within the hour the noble old man was no more. John was a man ever ready to face an emergency, and at this critical moment acted promptly. He immediately telegraphed to a friend in New York that Colonel Dupree and wife were to sail in one of the European steamers leaving that day, and requested him to impart the news of the death of Mr. Barthel. This done, he could only await the result and turn his attention to arranging the innumerable details for the removal of the remains. At noon he received a telegram from the colonel, informing him they would return at once, and the evening train brought them. Alice was so overcome by the excitement of the last 24 hours that she could see no one, but sought her room at once. She stood face to face with her first sorrow, that sternest of all life's stern realities, the inconsolable bereavement of death. Alas, when she had drained the bitter cup of grief, remorse would mix like gall with its heavy dregs. It was no easy task for John Kurtz to meet the man who had wrecked his hopes and ruined the lives of those most dear to him, but for Alice's sake he strove to mask his feelings under a courteous exterior. Can two such natures meet and each not know for a surety their antagonism? Virtue measures swords with villainy, but cunning fence cannot always parry the powerful home thrusts of honest purpose. The colonel gave John Kurtz no opportunity for further conversation than was absolutely necessary to complete the arrangement for their departure in the early morning train, and it was not until they reached home and the funeral was over that the two men had an interview. Mr. Barthel had left a will bequeathing all his property, save $10,000 to John Kurtz, to his daughter to remain in trust until she should be 21 years of age. His friend and legal advisor, Judge Alton, and John Kurtz were appointed trustees. When Colonel Dupree learned of this, a shade of ill-disguised dissatisfaction passed over his countenance, and he announced rather stiffly that as soon as the business matters could be settled, he should sail with his wife for Europe. This information was a terrible blow to John Kurtz, who had hoped that Alice would at least be near him, for he feared that her sad awakening was soon to come, and longed to soften, though he could not avert it. His frequent requests to see her were never granted, on the plea that she was not in a condition to see anyone, and that quiet was her only safeguard. When the time of their departure was drawing near, he once more urged his request. The colonel affected to hesitate, then informed him that his wife did not wish to see him again, but that he would convey his wish to her. The following morning, John received this answer, written in a trembling hand. Mr. Kurtz, it is impossible for me to see you. Circumstances do not justify me in doing so. Alice Dupree. The strong man bowed his head and turned away in silence, while the colonel's eyes gleamed with demoniacal satisfaction. On reconsidering the little note, John saw plainly that he had been the victim of misrepresentation, and in fact everything seemed to conspire against him. Hard as it was to feel that Alice had been so ready to mistrust him, he attributed much to the influence of her husband, and resolved to make one last effort to communicate with her. It seemed almost hopeless, but he could not bear that their intercourse should cease without a single parting word. He wrote the note which is read by Alice in the opening of this story. Under its guise of formality throbbed a current of deep feeling. It was calculated to betray nothing, should it fall into the hands of her husband, and yet the warmth of affection would educe from its simple words their hidden heartfelt meaning, even as heat makes legible characters traced in invisible ink. This note he enclosed to a friend in New York, begging him to deliver it in person. The old house was closed, its occupants gone, and the terrible excitement of months had passed away. The conflicting emotions that had swept over the life of John Kurtz, and pitiless desolation, had spent their violence. His inalienable love and pity remained, and disappointment and misunderstanding had not made him morbid. Although a certain dreary loneliness had settled upon his life, and a crushing weight of anxiety and regret often pressed heavily upon his heart, he looked forward to the future with unswerving trust and steadfast patience. He was the grand faith of the Christian. That man, poor fallen man, with all his weakness and littleness, can look up to the almighty Creator of worlds and feel that he is mindful of him, that he will care for him with a father's love. That trust never failed him. A year slipped from the revolving calendar, and the record of a second was half unrolled when John decided to go to Europe, ostensibly to perfect some business arrangements, really to learn some particulars of Alice, of whom nothing had been heard since her departure. Arrived in Paris, he had but one clue, the banker through whom the remittances had been made from the estate. In applying to him, he was informed that Colonel Dupree was traveling in Germany. Thither he directed his course, and judging from his knowledge of the man that he should find him at some fashionable gambling resort, proceeded to Hamburg. Here a trace was obtained, for the colonel was well known in the place as a roué and notorious gambler, but he had left several weeks previous for Wiesbaden. Pushing on as rapidly as possible to this place, most startling news awaited him. Colonel Dupree had arrived there, as reported, had lost heavily at play, and one evening, while at the gaming table, in a delirium of excitement, he grossly insulted a stranger who shot him on the spot. His assassin had escaped, and these were all the facts John could learn. Of Madame Dupree, no one could give him any information. It was not even known that the deceased had a wife. Certainly she had not been there. John Kurtz was surprised and troubled, and used every endeavor to find the valet of the late colonel. With some difficulty the man was discovered, and proved to be as worthless as his master. Money bought what knowledge he possessed, and he stated that the lady was living in a little village about 15 miles from Wiesbaden, that she had been very ill but was slowly recovering, and that she was not yet aware of the death of her husband. His delay to inform her of it was accounted for by many specious excuses, but John strongly suspected the fellow had served some purpose of his own by the concealment. Ordering a carriage, he drove to the village, taking the valet with him, and during the drive elicited some information respecting Colonel Dupree. It seemed he was well connected, and had been educated for the army, but early in life became exceedingly dissipated, and left his country in consequence of being involved in debt. Then followed his experience in the Confederate army, and as a prisoner, and his marriage. On his return to Europe, he hardly made a pretense of introducing his wife to society, and his selfish indifference gradually resulted in her entire seclusion. They wandered from place to place to gratify his passion for novelty and amusement. The greater part of the money received from the estate was squandered at the gaming table. Careless expressions of the valet on giving this account were significant to John Kurtz. They revealed what an angel of patience the inexperienced, indulged girl had been in her offers to win her husband to a better life, how bravely she had striven to reconcile the dissimilarity of their ideas and habits, and to accommodate herself to the frivolous life of the gay circles he frequented. The effort had been fruitless and was relinquished, for such a nature as hers could not find distraction when it had vainly sought redress. She grew dispirited and ill, and welcomed the solitude to which she was left by the protracted absence of her husband. Poor Alice! Brief had been the illusion and bitter the trials of her married life. During this conversation, the carriage had rolled rapidly on, and now stopped before a neat little cottage. John directed the valet to remain where he was with the driver, and await his return. Then, swinging open the little gate, strode rapidly up the walk, but paused a moment upon the threshold. He had been so absorbed in the search that he had not thought of the meeting that was now so near. The impulse had been to find and to care for her. He had scarcely thought of himself or what their interview might be. Only a door separated him from the woman he loved, and the past crowded in upon him as upon the drowning man in one brief moment. Presently he knocked sharply. The door was opened by a stolid servant girl, who replied to his inquiry that madam was indisposed and saw no one. "Take this card to her. I will wait till you return." The flaxen-haired maid, with an incredulous air, obeyed his direction and disappeared within a side room. A shriek, a fall. John hurriedly pushed open the door, and motioning the terrified girl to stand aside, raised the insensible form of Alice to the sofa. By the use of simple restoratives, she soon rallied a little, enough to faintly murmur, John Kurtz," and immediately relapsed into another swoon. While using every endeavor to restore her to consciousness, John could not fail to remark the terrible change that had been wrought. The thin, wan face and sunken eyes told all too plainly the story of her sufferings. Suddenly there was a movement, the eyes half unclosed, and she made a vain attempt to rise, asking faintly, "Was it only a dream?" John dismissed the German girl, who stood by, kindly but curious, then answered softly, "No, Alice, it is all true. I am here, your old friend." "And you will not leave me?" "No, Alice, never again, until you bid me." A long, troubled sigh followed. The eyes closed as if satisfied that they had not been deceived, and the weary heart found utterance in an uncontrollable flood of tears, which John did not try to check, though at intervals he spoke to her soothingly. "Be at rest, Alice, child," he said. "The cloud has passed." She started up in sudden fear. "But John, if he should come—" "He will never come again, Alice. He is dead." "Dead?" she repeated in a low tone, looking into John Kurtz's eyes, where she had never read aught save truth. Their mute assurance was enough, and without a question she sank back upon the cushions. John did not speak. There was no need for words. He saw a peaceful look settle upon her features, heard a sigh of relief flutter between her lips, and knew that his tidings had been of an unhoped deliverance. The chains that bound her life in spite of rebellious struggles of her tortured heart were broken. She made no hollow pretense of grief it was impossible she should feel. The first delusion of attachment had vanished long since. leaving neither respect nor pity in its place, for her husband had done her an irreparable wrong. He had betrayed her guileless trust only to win her fortune. It alone had been the lure to his sordid nature, and to seize it he had trampled ruthlessly upon all the fair possibilities of her young life. The alienation was complete. Their union was naught save a galling fetter. All this, of which a hint had been given in the broken words of Alice's first greeting, John now divined in its full extent as he watched her, worn out by excitement and revulsion of feeling, and still too weak from recent illness to try to think, lying just conscious of the blessed succor and tender care, until she sank into a quiet sleep. How his heart throbbed with thankfulness for the restored confidence and the merciful release of death. The sorrowful past was almost forgotten, or rather it was brightened by a budding hope that its trials, bitter as they had been, were still not those that blight the heart forever. Better far the most ghastly wounds than a subtle poison instilled into the very life-blood. With the lightning speed of thought, these conjectures passed through the brain and gave place to yearning pity, which drowned all other emotions, even the indignation and contempt which had been already hushed by the cold finger of death. Presently he left the room and summoned the servant, whom he informed of the death of Colonel Dupree, as well as that he should remain until the morrow, when, if Madame Dupree was available, they would leave. He next called the valet and directed him to return to Wiesbaden for a comfortable carriage, which should convey them on the following afternoon to the nearest railway station, whence they would take the train en route to Paris. The man departed with this and other commissions, and did not return again. Re-entering her room, he found Alice still sleeping, and was about to withdraw, when his eye fell upon an open note lying near the sofa. He instantly recognized his own signature. It was his farewell letter, written long ago and only opened by her a few moments before John arrived with the news of her husband's death. That morning, in searching among the colonel's papers, she had discovered an envelope containing the note which should have been delivered to her in New York, and Alice was learning the last bitter lesson of her married life as John drove up to the door of her cottage. Another thread was woven into the web of his thought, one that shone like a tiny gleam of gold from out the ravelled past. Alice slept several hours and awoke refreshed and with a lighter heart than she had known for months. She hardly realized that the events of the day had not been a dream until the German girl, who was watching by her side, delivered a message from John, that he would come to her whenever she desired. She lay silent a moment, then, as if afraid of her own thoughts and feeling the necessity for action, rose, and with the girl's assistance rearranged her toilette, knotting a ribbon at her throat in the old tasteful fashion, though with a self-pitying smile. Then she sent for John, who, as he entered, said, "You are better, Alice. Your sleep has refreshed you." Taking both his hands in hers, she drew him to a seat, saying, "I would like just to look at you and think for a long time. Yet there are so many questions I would ask, so much that I should tell you. First, let me know how you came abroad at this time, and how you found me out in this remote place." She stopped suddenly, overcome by bitter recollections, and her voice broke as she added, "Oh, John, you cannot respect me now." His answer was one to soothe and strengthen her. "There is, indeed, very much to be told by both of us, Alice, but not tonight. You need rest. Try to take it and not to trouble about anything. That I do respect you, you cannot doubt, and—" "But, John," interrupted Alice, "think of what I have done. I have not only wrecked my own life, but I have killed my darling father." No, Alice, you must not feel thus. You are young yet, and with God's blessing, there is much happiness still in store for you. The trial has been a sad one, but let us hope the dark hours are past. Your dear father is no more, but were he living, think how fondly he would welcome you again to the old home, and if from the better land he can look down upon you now, would not his words be, 'Live on, my child, let the future atone for the past'? You know this, Alice. Live for him, then. The kind parent who watches over all will bless you, and from the night of darkness shall dawn the light of a holier, happier day." Alice listened silently, the tears stealing down her cheeks. Kind words from a noble heart were to her as cooling waters to the weary traveler on the arid desert. Later he told her in a few brief words of the arrangement made for her departure, to which she assented gratefully. The perfect reliance she felt upon him was an inexpressible rest to her, weak and agitated as she was, and well did his tender care justify her implicit trust. He felt her cheered and consoled, with a shadow of her old smile resting on her face as she said, "I wish I could thank you for all you are to me, but no words could do that. Good night." The next day they started on their journey. Alice bore it better than was anticipated. They traveled slowly, however, and from Paris proceeded to England. Alice desired to visit Grassendale, a quiet little village, her father's birthplace, of which he had often told her. John was not only willing to grant her every wish, but felt also that the delay and rest would be well for her before making the voyage home. At twilight one day, they drove up to the little inn, and their sojourn in the quiet hamlet was prolonged beyond their intention, so welcome did they find its peaceful seclusion. During the journey, Alice had at times been very much depressed, though it did not seem in consequence of her talks with John, which were never painful. He had told her what it was necessary she should know of Colonel Dupree's death, and henceforth his name was rarely mentioned. This pall fell over her miserable married life, blotting it out of existence. Its memory might still haunt her like a ghost, but in their conversations so much was tacitly understood between them that the spectre was seldom summoned by indirect allusion. John did not wonder at the depression which his yearning love and pity could not alleviate, but he hoped time and change would ultimately banish it. To his surprise, as time approached for them to sail, Alice became even more sad and dispirited. One afternoon they had strolled away from the village by a rustic path which led them up a little knoll, on which they paused to watch the sunset. It was the loveliest hour of the day. Quiet brooded over the fair landscape of field, wood, and hamlet. The vesper songs of the birds came sweetly through the dewy air, and in the west gorgeous clouds of crimson and gold burned slowly away with hidden fires, till at last only their gray outlines and violet ashes remained. Alice seated herself on a fallen tree. She had been unusually silent during the entire walk. John broke the stillness. "Alice, child, you are keeping something from me. You are nursing a sorrow that you have not shared with me. Cannot you trust me?" She turned her face up to his, was silent a moment as she looked into his anxious eyes, then said, "Trust you? Yes, John Kurtz, I would trust my very soul in your keeping, but why should I burden you with a sorrow I alone ought to bear? I was thinking when you spoke that I was like a wrecked ship drifting back to the shore from whence it sailed. Stranded there, its shattered hulk may survive the storm of a few years. Then the waves will engulf it, and the wild winds sing its requiem. I know it is wrong, but sometimes I wish my requiem were sung. Nay, do not interrupt me. I know all you would say. You are good, noble, true, but oh God, it is terrible, this being thrown back on oneself, and that self so utterly weak and— Alice, interrupted John. I cannot, will not listen to this longer. I cannot, for I love you too dearly. Were your life a wreck, then were mine also. I have lived for you, and now that, after weary years of waiting, I have found you and would take you home to my heart, can I listen to these words from your lips?" The soul of the strong man had spoken. The pent-up thought of his life had found utterance, and he trembled at its shaping. Alice answered not, but buried her head in her hands. Again John gently broke the silence. "Alice, forgive me. I had not thought to have told you this, at least not until I had conducted you safely back to your old home." "Forgive you? Rather you forgive me for not having all to bestow that you ask," murmured Alice, then added hurriedly, "John, I must return now. I cannot talk more tonight. I can scarcely think. I will tell you all tomorrow." In silence they turned homeward, and reaching the little inn, parted with a trembling "Good night." What words could record the passage of those solitary, sleepless hours that followed, the heart-questionings, the harrowing doubts, the retrospection, the hopes and joy? The morning came at last, and John Kurtz awaited Alice in their little sitting-room. The door opened, she entered, Their eyes met in one long look, and as the strong arms encircled her, she whispered, "You have all my love, dear John." End of section 26, read by Elsie Selwyn.